You got Deion Tank Wilson, a 6'5", 305-pound redshirt senior. Wilson transferred to Syracuse before the 2024 season. Prior to that, he spent a year at New Mexico State, and before that, he was at Arizona for a few years. Last season, Deion Wilson, we did not see a whole lot of him, and that is because he started the first 4 games for Syracuse, but unfortunately, he suffered a near season-ending injury. Thankfully, he did come back to start the bowl game for Syracuse. But last year, you can kind of say it was a lost year for a guy like Deion Wilson. He made 13 tackles, 1 tackle for loss in 5 games. But according to Pro Football Focus, Deion Wilson won nearly 13% of his one-on-one pass rush matchups a year ago. For context, a first-round pick and a guy like Mason Graham over at Michigan won about 20% of his one-on-one snaps. So, hey, Deion Wilson, yeah, I get it. He's not Mason Graham, but he's actually pretty good at winning one-on-one battles, which is important for an interior defensive lineman. I do hope that we see a full season of Deion Wilson, because I think that he could be in line for a big year for Syracuse football. And what do you think? Comment in the comment section below. Do you think that Deion Wilson is going to have a big year along Syracuse's defensive line? I'd love to see your thoughts in the comment section below. Next up, we got Rashard Perry, a 6'3", 295-pound junior. Perry took a step forward last season. In 2023, he appeared in 10 games for Syracuse, but mostly just in reserve, didn't do a whole bunch of production. But last year, he appeared in 11 games. He started 4 of those contests. He had 17 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and 1.5 sacks. Perry was a good retention for Syracuse football this offseason. He will play a lot for the Orange this year, assuming that he is, of course, healthy for the entire year. And even if he is not necessarily named a starter, Syracuse does rotate its defensive linemen pretty much every single play. So he is going to play a lot for Syracuse. And hey, even if he's not a starter, it's a good problem to have when you have a guy like Rashard Perry as a depth player along your defensive line. Then you got Chris Thomas, 6'6", 315-pound redshirt senior. Thomas is a transfer from this offseason. He spent the prior 2 years over at Marshall, and before Marshall, Chris Thomas was at Florida for a couple of seasons. Thomas is known as a run-stuffing defensive tackle, meaning he's not necessarily going to jump out on the stat sheet. His main job is to cause chaos in the backfield and stop the run. So you're not going to see a lot of sacks for Chris Thomas this season. But last year was his best year in pretty much every statistical category. He played in 13 games for Marshall. He started 12 of those 13 games, 42 tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, and 1 sack. He did play a couple of games against power conference opponents, those being Virginia Tech and Ohio State, and he combined for 5 tackles and 1 tackle for loss. So Chris Thomas, a solid pickup for Syracuse in the transfer portal this offseason. Then he got George Rooks, 6'5", 295-pound redshirt senior. Rooks transferred to Syracuse this offseason as well, following 2 years over at Boston College. Before Boston College, Rooks was at Michigan for a couple of seasons. In fact, George Rooks is the son of Syracuse great George Rooks, who was the 1991 Big East co-defensive player of the year. Now, speaking of the George Rooks that is on this year's team, here's what he did at Boston College last year. He appeared in all 13 games for them. He started 11 of those contests, 26 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and 1 sack. Overall, it's a good pickup whenever you get someone in the portal who's got plenty of starting experience in a power conference. That means you know that they can play at this level. And hey, he's coming over from Boston College. That's in the ACC. There's familiarity, obviously, there with a guy like George Rooks. Now, if you look at Pro Football Focus, he did not necessarily have the highest grade a year ago, which we touched on more in depth when we were going over when George Rooks originally signed with Syracuse in the transfer portal. However, the one category where George Rooks really seemed to excel at last year, and I think it's really going to help Syracuse this season, is he graded out as a pretty good tackler. Tackling was a big problem for Syracuse on defense a year ago. Oftentimes, they were in pretty good position to make a play, but they would never get the ball carrier down on that first try. And when you don't get the ball carrier down on the first try, obviously that could lead to big plays, which we saw plenty of last season, unfortunately. But it's also the little things, right? If you don't make that tackle in the first try, well, that ball carrier can get 1 or 2 extra yards. So instead of maybe 2nd and 7, now it's 2nd and 5. And that makes a big difference what you're going to do on 2nd down, 2nd and 5 versus a down like 2nd and 7. So overall, with a guy like George Rooks, not sure if he's going to be a starter or not, even though we know he's capable of starting games. He did it at Boston College, but he should help Syracuse in tackling, which was a big weakness for them last season. And then finally, you got Elijah Fuentes-Cundiff, 6'4", 295-pound redshirt senior. He has spent all 4 of his prior seasons over at Syracuse. He's appeared in 32 games for the team with 1 career start, which I believe came in 2022. He's a veteran depth player. I'm not expecting him to be a major contributor for Syracuse along the defensive line, but nevertheless, a solid depth piece to have for this team for this upcoming season.